We recently gave a class at our shul of the importance of human life and the value of human life. Human life is so important, and it's actually a gift of the Jewish world. Sorry, it's a gift of Judaism to the world, because in ancient times, we studied different texts from Roman law and Greek law of the times. A parent had the right to end the life of a child, and many poor people would do it because they couldn't afford it, and even rich people did it as well because they didn't want to split the Yerusha. They didn't want to split the inheritance. And then you had people who would end the child's life because it was a girl and they wanted to have a boy. In ancient times, the sport of the time for entertainment was gladiators, where people would fight each other and kill each other. This was what they. This was. If everyone could please mute yourself. If everyone could please mute yourself, except for David. David, you could stay on.
I think there's a way, if you're the host, I think you can a way to mute everybody.
Yes, I can mute everyone, but I think there's a way for me to mute everyone. I think it's easier if everyone does themselves. Hello, Avram, how are you? So, everyone could please mute yourself. So we'll be
usually the people who are making the most noise are not paying attention. That's why. So you have to like step in and mute them because they're not really paying attention to what they're doing.
Right. All right. So this is what it was. In ancient times, there was no value of life. It was pretty much the king gets to do whatever he wants, and it was pretty much the stronger person was the one who was in charge. There were duels. There was gladiators, infanticide. There was no value of human life. And this is something that Yiddishkeit brought to the world. The value of that every life, everyone is created, B'Tselem Elokim, everyone is created in a divine image. I remember a friend of mine a few years ago, he wrote a ha'ara. He said that B'Tselem Elokim is referring to Adam. Because technically, Adam is the parent of everyone, Jews and non-Jews, all come from Adam Rishon. So technically, everyone has that Tzelem Elikim, and this was a gift that Yiddishkeit brought to the world. That now everyone's into rights, everyone's into protecting everyone. America's all into everyone's rights. However, there's a lot of change happening now, especially when we see what's happening now with the corona. A lot of doctors, unfortunately, one of the reasons why everyone is being isolated is because they're afraid of overwhelming the hospitals. And the hospitals don't have enough respirators, don't have enough beds, and the doctors have to choose who is going to get the next respirator, which is a very slippery slope and dangerous slope. So let's go to a Ma'aseh B'Koil, something that's happening right now. A suicide, we know, is Asr al Pi Torah. And halachically, technically, if somebody commits suicide, they're not supposed to be buried in a regular Beis HaKvaros. That's from a very, very technical point of view. They're not supposed to be buried with everyone else. Practically speaking, I don't believe we actually follow this. Why? Because practically speaking, I think what we say is that it could be at the last second the person regretted it. And if the person regretted it even at the last second, then they're not considered hamabed asma ladas that they committed suicide. So I think halachically this is what we do, and we give them a regular burial because it's not a simple thing. However, this is becoming very different in today's day and age, where the governments are becoming more liberal-minded, and it's all about people's rights versus people's responsibilities. And this is a war, I would say. Reb David, would you say it's a war that's happening now in the Western world?
The world as a whole.
The world as a whole. So what I'm going to ask my dear friend Reb David Smith. Reb David is first of all, a mixed shach b'fanav. He's a great Talmud Chacham. In addition to that, he's a Chassidish Yid, and he's a lawyer, and he's on the front lines fighting this case in the New Jersey Supreme Court, which is a tremendous achrayus, because this is going to, Bez Hashem, set a standard that future courts will be able to use, that will be able to help many lives in the future. So, Rabbi David, if you could give us a little background as to what, first of all, a Torah perspective, if you could add something that what I missed. Number two, what is happening in the world today? You know a lot more details than we do, and how that's where it's going from here.
Great, well, thank you, Rabbi Lerman. Just by way of background, I studied in both in Eretz Yisrael and in America, and I've spent from 770. And in addition, I practiced law. I studied molecular biology and virology at the University of California, Berkeley. And so I do have a background in some of the legal and scientific issues that are at play over here with the concept of physician-assisted suicide. And I know that everyone who's on this call is here voluntarily because there's no mashgiach to make sure that you're on the call. And if you're in the yeshiva environment and you're not used to an unstructured life, it could be very challenging. And my hope is that in this time that we have together, I can give you a sense of the importance of Torah, not only for your own life, but for the entire civilization. And I think that this case that we're going to talk about is something that really emphasizes this, because there's a kind of a tendency to start to think that, when we learn Torah, we can get very much into concepts that are, kira and making cholent and kidneys and many things like that. And we look around us and we see, listen, the non-Jews, the non-from people, they might not have big cholent, but they also, their lives look pretty good. What exactly is the Torah offering us that we don't have otherwise? And I think this case really brings that to a really sharp relief, because what I've discovered in this case is that once we step away from the absolute right and wrong of the Torah, that it's wrong under any circumstances to take a human being's life to shorten it. Obviously, we have the issues of skila and so forth in very exceptional circumstances where that person has so damaged the society and hurt other human beings, or gone against the Creator's will. But in general, as human beings, we're not allowed, we don't have permission to go and say this person's life is unworthy of life. And what happens is we start to get our minds start to get clouded by appeals to what the other the proponents of the death lobby call compassion. So, and obviously as one of the great qualifying identifiers of a Jew is compassion. So here you have a person who's suffering really tremendously. They're going to die anyways, and we see that there's really a pull on the heartstrings to say, why not let this person take a poison? Why should this person have to suffer anymore? And it's a compelling argument. Although we're fighting it in court, we can understand why someone would be moved to do such a thing. Now, there's a couple of aspects I want to address over here with this case that I think are really valuable to give you life lessons in terms of understanding the importance of Torah and also understanding each one of our role in speaking up against these things and being a light into the nations. Because we've benefited from living in the United States of America, where there's kind of a residual positive effect from the righteousness or the proper conduct of people in prior generations. But we're now living in a time where children have been sent to public schools. There's no mention of God. There's no right and wrong in an absolute sense. And now we have them coming to voting age. They've already been voting age for a while. And there's really no moral compass left in the country in terms of being able to determine what the right thing is. So all of a sudden, physician-assisted suicide, which was forbidden in all cultures for thousands of years, is now supported by, they estimate, say, by certain polls, 60% of the people in the state of New Jersey. How is that possible? That's because there's no moral leadership, there's no moral teaching, and there's no instruction to children and adults as to what are the issues at table here. So I just wanted to give that as a little bit of background, and I did notice that while I was in the midst of this case, the Hair magazine came out with someone's not muted. Um,
And if everyone, just a reminder, if everyone can mute themselves, that'd be very helpful.
the other problem is that we start to get lulled into a sense of, you know, the compassion and feeling for these people. And then we see, you know, it's just this one person over here. And I really want to take a moment to really disabuse anyone of that idea that, okay, it's just one elderly person that's going to die anyways. So anyways, the Hair magazine came out with this this article a few months back about the importance of the Rebbe's mitzvah Torah and the importance of learning Torah. And when I was reading it, I realized that what the Rebbe was really talking. So I'll unmute myself.
Sorry, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hold on a second. There we go. And you're unmuted.
Wait, so what the Rebbe is really saying is that you have to be tethered to something. When you're going to be faced in life with these various presenting issues and arguments and stuff like that, human logic in of itself is able to justify anything. And this is what the Rebbe said the real cause of the Holocaust was. The real cause of the Holocaust was that they took took God out of the German school system. And once you don't have any reference point back to making a decision what's right and wrong, you could really justify anything. And that's what happened in Germany. And that's what's happening with physician-assisted suicide. And the comparison to the Nazis in Germany and physician-assisted suicide is not coincidental, because in 1939, the Nazis introduced something called the T4 euthanasia program, where their goal was to euthanize people that were elderly and were disabled and terminally ill, and just eliminate their lives. And it was supposed to be a voluntary program. Voluntary. It wasn't really so voluntary as it was implemented. There's a couple key points over here that we have to understand. Number one, that I found a quote from a Nazi doctor, a participant in this, and he said, when we started, we thought this was really for people's benefit. It was really a good thing to relieving suffering, but it got out of control. Now that was his perspective. The people that orchestrated this knew where it was going, but they were able to take some doctors who were well-meaning, perhaps some not so well-meaning, some well-meaning, and what happened was Rabbi Lerman was talking about the Tzelem Elokim, became corrupted through the process of murdering people, that they were able to justify in their mind that these lives were unworthy of lives. And that was an actual terminology that the Germans used. Those same doctors, once they got into that habit and that attitude, all that needed to be done was to expand the definition of lives unworthy of life. And that grew to include the Jewish people. It grew to include other populations. It grew to include the opponents of the Nazi regime. And Goebbels said that once they finished, God forbid, with the Jews, they were going to kill all the Poles and all the Ukrainians and then go from there. So this was really a starting point of an ever-expanding definition of what are called lives unworthy of life. So our point in this case is that the state of New Jersey, by allowing physician-assisted suicide, is really creating a definition of someone whose life is unworthy of life. Because right now, if a 39-year-old person who's healthy, God forbid, is despairing, he lost his family, God forbid, he lost his girlfriend, he lost his job, life is difficult, and he feels that the only way out is to end his life, the entire resources of the state of New Jersey would come to rescue him from suicide. The fire department would come, they'd climb out on a ledge for him, the police department would come. The whole state of New Jersey is going to promote his life, convince him, even if he's done it 5, 6, God forbid, attempts at suicide, continue to come and rescue him. But if a person, however, is told by a doctor, by an estimate, it's only speculation as to whether they're going to die within a certain period of time based on statistics. If that person is told that, and they therefore make a request for a poison, the state of New Jersey says, we're not even going to stop you from taking that poison. We are going to actually promote this by creating this opportunity for a person to commit suicide and the doctor to participate in the killing. So that is creating a definition of a life unworthy of life. And right now, that's limited to people who have less than 6 months to live. Now, there's no logical reason why 6 months and not 3 months, not 3 years. If a person's going to die and decides that their life is not worthy of life, or their doctor recommends that, then why that? Why that just that limit? And we see that in Europe now. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy that the rampant use of physician-assisted suicide, and they are trying to expand it. The Supreme Court of Quebec said that the 6-month limitation is unconstitutional under Canadian law, because why shouldn't a person with only 3 years to live be able to kill themselves? In Europe, they're now saying it should not be limited merely to terminal illnesses. If a person's in psychological pain, and anyone who's ever experienced being down or down about life can probably say that psychological pain is in many cases even worse than the physical pain of an illness, God forbid. That is now, I think there was a girl in her 20s that was recently in the news about her wish to, and the psychiatrists are going around to the hospital and saying, you're really suffering from this mental illness, this depression. You do have an option to kill yourself, and here's how, this is the poison.
David, I
Yes.
actually saw a report that in the Netherlands, a parent is allowed to request a doctor to kill their child that has psychological issues.
And this is now the Canadians are talking about in the latest one of their pediatric magazines whether this physician-assisted suicide should be expanded to children that are terminally ill. And the question they're asking themselves is, should parental consent even be needed? Meaning to say, should the child just be, you got a, God forbid, 6-year-old child that's sick, should the parents be consulted first? Should the child be able to make their own decision? This is an attitude of death and murder. And it completely ignores the fact, a couple key pieces of medical information over here. Number one, many people do survive. 13% of people survive the 6 months. My wife had a friend, I think her name was Chani Whitebrought in Eretz Yisrael, that she had 6 months to live. She ended up living for 10 years. She wrote many books. She spoke at many conferences and really inspired women around the world. And then did pass away after 10 years, but she survived all that time, 20 times longer than was predicted. And she made such a great contribution, not only to her family, but to the whole world. So this whole idea that there's a life unworthy of life, it's not worth going on, that it's over, these are all the human ego making decisions about what's worthwhile and then deciding to end it. Rabbi Lerman talked about, the Jewish outlook on suicide. And the reason that it's so forbidden, so the consequences of it are so high, is because ultimately the closer the relationship a murder occurs, the greater the terribleness of it is. Meaning, a person kills a family member versus a stranger. If the person kills themselves, that's the closest, most intimate relationship. And really, it's ultimately a denial of his belief in God, a belief in that there is hope, and really, in a certain sense, is not really felt. We're all suffering. We're all alive in this world. We all have our challenges. We're all going through our own upsets and difficulties. And a person exiting because it's too much for them is really a spit in the face at everyone else, and not only a denial of God's providence and realizing that God is taking care of the person, but also leaving the rest of humanity to muddle through this ourselves. And we need everybody. Every human being is a valuable contribution, and it's like we're all on a ship together. We're all rowing together, and one guy says, "You know what? This is too much for me. I'm just going to jump off the ship and drown, God forbid." Well, that's a complete abandonment of the people that are working together to row the boat. So that's why it's something that's so looked down on because of that. Now, there's obviously this, we feel for the person that is in such a level of pain, but at the same time, it's something that's not something that, it's not just that we don't, we look at it as something that's a wrong act. It's an objectively a wrong act. So,
can I mention something, Rabbi?
Yes.
Can I interrupt? So first, the first thing is that I heard from Rabbi this past summer. We had a conference for teachers, and I heard from Rabbi from Argentina, Rabbi Asher Farkash. He said that a bacher once came to him and said, "You know why I'm not having a tzach yeshiva? Because my father's of this, and my mother's of this, and I was neglected, and I was all these different reasons why his home is not a safe home, which are problems, which are issues." However, what Rabbi Farkash told him was that We don't get to choose our situation in life. Who our parents are not our choice. How we look is now not our choice. Whether we're tall, whether we're short, whether we're strong, certain our health, many things are just not our choice. However, this is our mission in life. Hashem gave us all the koyches we need to be successful in our lives. And if someone has, relating it to our case that we're discussing, if someone's going through a difficult time, it's not the hemfree we should end life, but this is our purpose and the meaning in life. And the second thing I want to bring out is that I think perhaps, let me know if this is true, if the government would focus more, if the government wouldn't have this law, is it a law? Is it what's together of it?
Well, it's a law that permits doctors to prescribe a poison and pharmacists to prescribe a poison to a person who has less than 6 months to live by the speculation of the doctor, and then take their own life through the use of this poison.
So if the government wouldn't make this law, it would force them, the government, to make more programs to save life.
Correct.
So is it on one hand, it's the government saying, neglecting its responsibility to save lives?
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to go back to your point about, B'tachon and what our purpose is. Everyone gets to a point in life where they're like, everything looks so grim and dark that they can't even really figure out where they are and what Hashem means to them and stuff like that. Let's just take a really, when the person gets to that type of situation, you have to go to like really, really simple, basic things. And the basic thing is that we are alive and we are breathing. And if we look at other living creatures, you look outside and to see a squirrel, you could see a squirrel that's limping. You could see a squirrel that has a funny color and its tail is misshaped, and a bird this and that. All these kind of things, a tree that has an odd shape. Those living things are not going around contemplating how they're not good looking enough, they're not successful enough, any of those things. They continue to do the very best they can to promote their own life and promote the life of their species. It's only when we can become human beings and we start to try to think about these things and what does it mean that I'm tall, I'm short, I'm this, I'm not successful. All these things are our ego that are creating all these justifications as whether the life is worth living or not. That's where everyone gets into trouble in everything, whether it's in Shalom Bayis and their studies. Once we start thinking insecure thoughts and we start to let those run, insecure thoughts always come to our head. But once we start to take them seriously, there's no end to it until we realize that we're just purely off our rockers, taking seriously an insecure thought. And reality is that without even having to get into any great swarm, we can realize we are breathing right now, we are alive right now, and that there is a living force in us which is taking care of us at every moment, and that itself is propelling us. And we may not see how it's going to get better, but that's not our calculation. That's irrelevant to our current experience, which is that we are alive. Our projections of the future or problems with the past are really irrelevant. The squirrel is not walking around traumatized over the fact that it almost got hit by a car 2 hours ago. The squirrel is just going ahead and finding the next acorn, building its nest, taking care of its family, and it goes through like that. And that's something that's really important for us as human beings to recognize, that we need to simplify our lives a lot. We really overthink things. The problem with the whole Enlightenment and the problem with the German philosophers like Kant and so forth, it was just, and Nietzsche, which were also somewhat propelled the Holocaust, are just the overthinking of everything, the overanalysis. Once you start Freud, if you start reading it, and don't read his books, I don't recommend it. It's just depressing, because once you start just thinking things through to such a great degree, it's totally irrelevant, circular human ego. So,
do you think it's more in this generation than in previous generations?
Well, I think there's two problems. One is that we have in this generation is, number one is that first of all is greater accessibility, but let's not fool ourselves. By the times of the Chofetz Chaim, only 10% of the Yidden were from in the times of Rabbi Yonasan Steif. I read a biography of him. He was a great Rav based in Budapest. He grew up in a town in the 1800s that his family was the only family in that Hungarian town that stayed from in the 1800s. So there was plenty of influences.
Everyone always says that our generation, this is something that's happening. You're saying that's not true. This has been going. You didn't have it for years.
This is not true. I mean, no, that's not true. There's nothing really new in this generation. We could say there's an accessibility to things that can throw a person off track, but people were being thrown off track then. People were, there was the modernization movement and the Enlightenment movement and the Maskilim, and there was all kinds of different things going on, and for hundreds of years. I mean, this is it's very funny. If you read Ma'am Loyas, some boys like to grow their hair out like this. It's what they call the chup or something like that. In Ma'am Loyas, he writes over there that in Turkey, Erev Pesach, they would, I think it was, I read in the Pesach section, it says they came into the yeshivas with scissors, and they would just grab the boys and cut off these chups off their head, because there's always been, this adoption of other customs and other things and that thinking. But I think the other problem we have today, and really for those that are studying smicha here, are going to study smicha, we do have I think a different crisis today, which is that that the Rabbanim have turned to secular thinking, or substituted like the thinking of psychologists and so forth for Torah thought. And it's very easy to try to justify it and explain it and so forth. But now there's kind of I think it's a big problem. People are starting not really sticking to the core subject. What Torah has a very, very simple, pure concept, which is there's one God. There's nothing else besides God, and have a good life. And the good life comes from recognizing there's one God, and there's nothing besides God. And it's very simple. And by, you were saying before about the psychological issues and stuff like that. Well, once you start acknowledging all that and start making that to a big metzias, and now a person's going to go to a psychotherapist for years, and there's just no end to it. Woody Allen has a great line in one of his movies. I didn't see it, but I saw it quoted somewhere. He says, I've been going to a therapist. What they call it, an analyst. I've been going to an analyst for 40 years, and I'm up to kindergarten. But to go back to our point here, how we perceive ourselves and how we feel our life is valuable or not, the type of experiences we have really come from our thoughts, and what thoughts we choose to focus on. So am I valuable right now? Like right now, I'm having this conversation with you, and the other people are here. I mean, this is either the greatest thing that I've ever done, and I'm providing this for 11 people on this call, or it's I'm a loser. I'm only talking to 11 people, and what's the relevance of it? No one wants to listen to me. Probably half the guys that are listening are busy either filing their nails or checking the WhatsApp messages, and so that's an insecure thought. I have a choice. What am I going to focus on? So when we come and see that this is really this concept of physician-assisted suicide is really like a focal point to recognize the importance of understanding the value of human life, and also the limitation on our permission. Even though there's a incredible story in Shmuel base, beginning of Shmuel base, where the Jewish soldier comes and he says to David HaMelech that he was in the last minutes of Shalom Melech, and Shalom Melech had been mortally wounded, and they're surrounded by enemies, and the enemies were coming and they were going to kill him. So that was what happened. Shalom Melech said to this soldier, just finish him off. So the soldier did. And so very fascinating if you read the Meforshim over there. David HaMelech says, why did you sin against the anointed of God, the Mashiach Hashem? So the Meforshim take for granted that it was usher for this guy, it was forbidden for this soldier to kill another human being. So why did King David have to relate it to that he killed the anointed of God? And the answer is because since there were no witnesses and there was no warning to this person, the Beis Din could not execute him. But since he had touched the kingship and he killed the king, the anointed of God, which was Shaul, therefore David HaMelech now had the power to execute him, which he promptly did. But the point of that story is that here was Shalom Melech, who was mortally wounded. It's unquestioned that he was, mortally wounded, And not only that, was he going to die from his wounds, but he was also going to be murdered mercilessly if as soon as these enemy soldiers came and got him. So you cannot think of a better example of someone whose murder-suicide would be justified.
So it's interesting you brought that up, because when I was thinking about this class, so I remember learning that during the times of the Rishonim, the times of Rabbi Tam, the other Baal Tesis, and you had the Crusades. And the Crusades, unfortunately, would come to town. They would torture Yidden, convert or die. And I remember reading that in different communities, the poskim of the time had a question: should we commit suicide? Should we kill ourselves when we know that the other option is that we are going to be tortured mercilessly? And I believe that there was a split amongst the poskim at the time.
Right. So first of all, going back to the Shmuel base story with Shalom Melech. So King David Melech surely saw that this was usher, and he executed the person, even though it was 100% done out of compassion at the request of the person who was, it seems, by all means was going to die. And the reason is because every one breath of a human being is a divine breath. We do not have the permission to determine for ourselves or for anyone else when that should come to an end. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of your comment, and some people have raised that point, I really don't think it applies over here, because we're not talking about this, falling into the hands of an opponent. We see from Shalom Melech that he was the wrong thing. And obviously there's a difference of opinion. And God forbid we should ever experience those kind of things. But it's highly questionable what's the right thing. There's the story of the children that were on the Roman boat, and they all killed themselves and so forth. And these are terrible, terrible tragedies. But I don't think that they could be held up for examples at all. And I think that anyone who does try to do that today is really confused, because what we're living in right now and what we're meant to be living in, and I'll get to this in a second, what I've learned about the medical system today, but we're meant to be in a system where two things. One is doctors and scientists are racing constantly to find new cures and new solutions. And healing is possible. Just because a doctor said a person's going to die in 6 months, that is not imminent. It's not a certainty. It's definitely not a certainty. And also, with the advancements in palliative care, which is the care of people who are terminally ill and are in tremendous pain, there are tremendous medications available today that are enabled people to actually have a pain-free end of life. In the vast, vast majority of cases, my client, Dr. Yosef Glassman, says there's virtually no cases of anyone really suffering in what they call intractable pain. Like a person's lying there screaming constantly. There's virtually no cases like that. So we're not talking about anything comparable to the times of the Crusades or these type of very difficult decisions.
I think that the side that was saying why in those cases there were many communities, community of York, and as you mentioned, the Gemara mentions that the 400 boys and girls were on the boats being taken to Rome. So if I remember correctly, I saw that there's a difference between their cases and what we're discussing. Their cases, they knew that they were going to be forced to do an Avera. They knew that they weren't going to be able to withstand the torture. They weren't worried about the pain. They weren't afraid of the torture. They were afraid that when they die, they would have converted. Or they were afraid, as the children on the boat, they were afraid that Avera was going to be done to them, which was why they were able to why they chose to end their lives, whether it was right or wrong. But they chose to end their lives in order that they should go up to Shemayim without an Avera being done. It wasn't the pain that they were worried about. Right. It wasn't. I think that's the big difference. What we're discussing today of PAC is nothing to do with Ruchnius. It's only, does Hashem want us to have pain or not? And I want to say, if Hashem wants me to have pain, I'm fighting against it. I'm committing suicide. That wasn't what they were doing with them. They weren't afraid of the pain. I think they're afraid of the fact that they would end up doing Avera. That's what I remember. If something like that, you remember something like that?
Well, yes, and also there's another issue. I'd like to propose another distinction. In those types of terrible situations where you had a number of people and they made this decision as a group, at the end of the day, when they were finished what they felt was necessary to do, they were all completely 100% eliminated. In this situation here, we're talking about physician-assisted suicide. This is a process where you now have doctors that participated in the murder of their patients. Those doctors are a danger to humanity. They continue to exist and become, no matter what their good intentions at the start, they become more and more emboldened in the act of murder and participating in killing people. There is no way to draw a line and say, okay, well, the person's only going to go that far. Once they become desensitized to the act of deciding that they have the power to decide when it's right to kill a person, and then participating by providing the poison, even if the patient takes the poison themselves, is something that we are now faced with. This person running around. It's not like the doctor and the patient kill themselves together, and then we've kind of like, those people are no longer a danger to society. We now have doctors that become professional, white-coated assistants in the process of murder, and that's what happened in Germany. Those doctors became the doctors that ran the death camps because they had lost that sensitivity to human life. You have to realize something about the Nazis, by the way, and this is really, really critical, that while we like to think that the Nazis were somehow born all murderers and all terrible, terrible people, I think the facts show otherwise, and their training shows otherwise. I just want to give you a quick example to understand this. So the famous Gestapo officers with their dogs, and these were people who were murderers and killed people in the streets, mothers, women, children, everybody. Okay, I mean, these were people that, and we look at the pictures, we read the stories, it's horrifying. Their training involved being given a puppy, and their job was to raise that puppy. And anyone who's ever had a dog knows the bond that develops between an owner of a dog and a dog. So especially when you start as a puppy, okay? Their job and their training was to raise this puppy, to play with this puppy, train the puppy, and so forth. And the final act of their training is they had to kill the puppy that was now a dog that they had raised, okay? So this was not something that was disclosed to them at the beginning. This was something that they were led into destroying their own sense of humanity, and they at that point were already so invested in and had done other acts that were of that act that this was now just the next step, and their Tselem Elokim was eradicated through this training. So someone thought up this training program, by the way, and figured out how do you corrupt a group of humanity that would never have done this in the first place. If you had said to this Gestapo officer in the early part of his training and said, okay, Hans, you're going to have to kill this later on, or, before you signed up for the Gestapo, I don't know if he would necessarily have signed up as much as he might have thought the intellectual ideals of restoring the German order and all that kind of stuff were appealing to him. That is a reprehensible act for any human being, and especially if you've now bonded with that dog. So this was a training program that involved desensitizing humanity. These were human beings. The Gestapo officers were created by the same God that creates you and me, with the same Tselem Elokim. How did they go from zero to this murder machine? It was a very carefully planned training, and taking them one step at another that they justified it. Okay, this is terrible, but he's already invested so much, and he's already done so much that you can't step out of the mob once you're into it. Right. Once you take each one of those steps. So that's really important to remember over here when we're looking at these doctors, doctor so and so and doctor so and so. What, they're going to run a death camp? Come on, they go to the same golf clubs as me. They go to the same shul as me, maybe. What are you talking about? Well, the facts are that it doesn't matter what they think when they're starting. They can be truly motivated by compassion and so forth. Now, interestingly enough, talking about doctors, you said, this is Yiddishkeit's gift to the world, the primacy of human life. And really, this is from Adam Rishon and from his descendants. The Hippocratic Oath, which is over 2,000 years old, from the times of the Greeks, it has a fascinating opening. It's not written as a monotheistic thing. It claims allegiance to various Avodah Zarah. The next section is a section that says you are going to be trained as you have to teach whatever you learn from your teachers, and you have to be willing to be a teacher, and you have to keep the secrets of the trade, so to speak. And it says you may not teach medicine to anyone who does not take this oath. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the significance of that. The next sentence, the next paragraph, the first sentence says what is commonly translated into, do no harm. Okay, but what's the second sentence? The second sentence says, I will not give a poison to a patient to kill themselves, even if they request it. The third sentence says, I will not give something to a woman to cause an abortion, even if she requests it. Okay, so obviously what was happening at that time, and for thousands of years before that, was a great debate among doctors as what is their role. And Hippocratic oath came down and set in stone for these last 2,000 years what a standard of a doctor is. A doctor, for example, is not supposed to participate in torture. Even if he's a doctor at an intelligence service, the doctor is supposed to heal the guy who's just been tortured, and he could be available for that, but he cannot be part of the torture because that violates the Hippocratic oath. So 2 things I want to point out from this. Number 1 is, the fascinating thing is that the Hippocratic oath in the beginning section of what the teaching says, you cannot teach this to someone who won't take this oath. Meaning to say, if a young medical student comes to older doctor and says, please teach me the medical arts, but I'm not willing to say I won't give physician-assisted suicide, the teacher is forbidden to teach that younger student even how to cure an ingrown toenail. It doesn't matter how great a cardiologist that fellow is going to be one day, but if the senior doctor trains him and how many thousands of people he's going to save, if he refuses to take the oath in its entirety, he cannot be taught even one thing about the medical arts. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, and this goes to what I've discovered in representing this case and representing doctors, and this is really, people need to start to understand this. Number 1 is about 40 years ago, they started taking the Hippocratic oath out of the medical schools in the United States of America. So first they took out the line against abortion. Then they took out the line against physician-assisted suicide. So now we have generations of doctors that didn't really get this message in school. And many of the schools have now taken out the Hippocratic oath completely. Now, the other thing you have to know is what's going on in medicine today. And I was not aware of any of this until I started to meet with doctors and understand, because they started telling me the horror stories. The rate at which patients before physician-assisted suicide are eliminated when they become elderly and either don't have family that are advocating them or have family that are advocating for their death. By the way, it happens. We don't really understand this as religious Jews, but in the world, and even for religious Jews, this is a factor because it involves serious things. Number 1 is money, time, and energy. If you have a person has an elderly person who's in the hospital, they're using up the inheritance, they're taking everyone's time up, it's an extreme burden, and they're going to die anyways, according to that logic. And who wants to take care of someone on a ventilator and pay thousands of dollars a week and maybe a day for a nursing home? That's the thinking that gets into people's heads. And so there's a misconception. I've seen this in the Jewish community. Physician-assisted suicide doesn't apply to us. False. This applies to everybody. Everyone when faced with the cost and the time and energy to take care of an elderly person, or when we will be elderly and our children are going to be dealing with, do they want to use up the inheritance to keep Rabbi so-and-so alive for another maybe hours, days, weeks, months, years? This is definitely an issue in every community. So what's happening is they use things called morphine drips. Morphine is a painkiller that also suppresses respiratory activity, and in the right quantities can reduce a person's pain just slightly more, can end a person's life prematurely. This is going on routinely, and as a matter of fact, the frum doctors that I've spoken to are the odd people out in the medical system, like their colleagues are saying, why are you keeping these people alive on their ventilators and so forth? So we are now facing a minority of doctors that actually are willing to keep people alive I had a neighbor who's an anesthesiologist, and he came up to me one Friday night, Leil Shabbos, and said, you know, Shakayach, on what you're doing with this case. He said, let me tell you what happened this week in surgery. There was an elderly person, had needed emergency surgery, and this doctor was in there as an anesthesiologist, and the other doctors, the surgeons, were saying to them, this is in a condemnatory way, in a kind of like a complaining way, this is the only country in the world that we would be required to do a surgery for a patient like this. Everywhere else, the person would be allowed to die. And the anesthesiologist was a religious doctor, religious Jewish doctor. He was horrified, and like, no, he spoke up against them. He says, no, our job is to save this person's life. And anyways, the operation was successful, and the person, you know, recovered from the operation. But in Canada, interestingly enough, in Ontario, the courts have ruled that a doctor has to recommend a killing doctor to a patient if the patient wants to take their lives through physician-assisted suicide. And the message they're sending out, right, the court said, if you have a religious objection to that, don't be a doctor. So if you have an illusion that, well, okay, I'll go find a religious Jewish doctor, and I'll get the right care from him for my family member or myself or whatever it is, you're dreaming. Because as they clamp down on this, they will push the frum doctors either into being like the rest of the doctors, or they'll push the frum doctors out of the medical profession entirely.
Wow, that's it's scary when you see it that way. When you say it that way,
it is very scary.
So we have another. Sorry to cut you off. About another 7 minutes. I mean, I think it's so important for everyone to hear this, and we could, get the word out. More people should know about this. What is what you're saying is so many incredible things. What does the court feel about all these things? Why is it? What's the battle? What's going on in the courtroom?
So when we went into court the first time, the court takes the case very, very seriously. The Attorney General argues that no one should be able to challenge this case. We don't really have the time to get into the legal arguments they have, but I think it's very instructive to understand the state of the courts in the United States, which I walked out of court grateful that the judge granted the temporary restraining order, put the law on hold in August 2019. That was later overturned by the appellate division, and we went up to the Supreme Court of New Jersey twice and to try to reverse that. I do want to say that in that time that we had the temporary restraining order in place, I think there'll be an eternal merit to the judge that he actually saved lives. All the people that were reported in the newspaper about taking this poison were actually Jewish people. And one of the people who was, she was trying to get the poison, she was waiting for the law to go into effect. Dr. Glassman, our client, and we were successful in blocking it. What happened was that she ended off, by the time the temporary restraining order was overturned, then she could go get the poison. She'd already gone into hospice care, and she didn't end up getting the poison. She would have died on, God forbid, on August the 16th of 2019. She ended up living another 30 days as a result, because she didn't end up taking the poison. And her husband reported that while she was in hospice care, very touching moments that he had with her, including he reports that she gave him a smile that he will treasure for the rest of his life. So there's to how valuable a human life is, the value to that person, the value to the other people around them. There was another lady who wanted to take the poison, and we blocked it. And by the time it was now, the temporary restraining order was now back, it was turned over, dissolved, she had changed her mind. So we know of cases, therefore, that people's lives were literally saved. So, but here's what was distressing at the same time. So when I get in front of the judge at the time, who's now retired, Judge Innes, and I'm saying, and by the way, on the way to court, I was like, starting to research about this, we're driving, and I'm like, didn't the Germans have a euthanasia program? I'm reading all this stuff while we're driving to court. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like just a duplicate program. And by the way, I know we only have a few minutes, but there's so many important points, and maybe we'll have another opportunity. But in 1939, in America, the Euthanasia Society of America was formed, which had the exact same platform as Hitler's T4 program. And they advocating a right to die, physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, and their goals are, and it's the current organizations fighting for these laws are the successor organizations to the Euthanasia Society of America, and their goal is a much broader euthanasia than what they're just trying to get people to accept right now. So anyways, that's really critical information. That this is not like, okay, it's all going to stop here. So Judge Innes, he's like looking at me, and I'm talking about, the T4 program, and he's like, counselor, just talk about what's in the papers. And so we had 9 causes of action. It's a violation of the United States Constitution. It's a violation of the New Jersey Constitution. All these different things, different reasons why the law is illegal. And the last one we put in, which we thought was kind of like we didn't really know how strong an argument it was. It said in the law that the other agencies, the government agencies, are supposed to put into effect regulations about how this law is supposed to be implemented, and none of them did that. Law is invalid because there's no regulations. Judge Innes honed in only on that issue, that there was no regulations. And on that basis, he entered the temporary restraining order. Now, of course, he was then easily overturned because the appellate division said, well, no, they didn't have to do regulations. But what I walked out of so shocked was, here I'm talking about people being murdered, suicide. And what he hung it all on was whether there's regulations or not. And the analogy, the metaphor that came to me is like you go to a court in Germany or Hungary or somewhere, and you say all these people are being taken on a train to a death camp, they're going to be killed, and the judge says, come on, let's just focus. I know the train doesn't have the proper license, this doesn't have the proper regulatory stuff, the train has to stop until they get the proper license to operate the train. I mean, this is the level of the law that we're dealing with in the United States. It's all these arcane principles of whether it's strict scrutiny or rational basis, all these kind of things that people love to talk about in law school. But at the end of the day, they're permitting murder-suicide. And it shows us how far we've gone, that's how a judge is going to look at a case and is going to say, well, since the legislature passed it, therefore it's permissible. Since these are 2 consenting adults participating in this murder-suicide, it's going to be allowed. It's completely devoid of any anchor in humanity. We're not just talking about a belief in God and you have to believe the Bible is true. This is the anchor of humanity. The anchor of humanity is we do not kill other human beings. We do not participate in hastening the end of their life. It happens to be that this is enshrined in the Torah, and because the creator of life told us this also. I mean, that's how we know, and that's how we learn it. But every human being knows that. And what happens is when it's just when it's unrooted for anything that's absolute, an absolute understanding, then it just becomes a free-for-all. Like Rabbi Lerman was saying earlier, what happened, just getting rid of the children, God forbid, that are sick, the disabled children. I want to finish on another point over here, is this goes completely above politics, and it's a tremendous opportunity to really shine as the light into the nations, to go and speak to people. Each one of you that's listening, this is really a chayiv kodesh to tell people about this. And the reason is because what I've seen is that the organizations, the Jewish organizations, are mityayesh about any chance of stopping this. And it was 7 years of battles in the New Jersey legislature for the death lobby to try to put this into effect. And they finally succeeded. And by the time they got to the 7th year, organizations like Agudas Yisrael were just giving up and weren't even coming back to testify against it. And after the law was passed, and I called up the executive director of Agudas Yisrael in New Jersey, and I said, what are you going to do? So there's no chance of it getting repealed. There's no chance of fighting at court. And later on, after we filed the case, he got up on the record and said, our client and our firm is like Pinchas that stood up when no one else was doing anything. That's the fact. Rabbi Shmuel Kaminetsky, he should live long and be well, was willing to put on a writing letter that this is usur and it's murder and everyone should do everything possible to support our fight against physician-assisted suicide. But so many other people are silent, and it, you see everyone today, coronavirus, anyone who's making a minion is all kinds of condemnatory language, how they endanger people. I have news for you. There's more people dying from physician-assisted suicide than coronavirus, and a lot of the people who are dying in Italy are probably having their lives ended because the Supreme Court of Italy permitted it in September 2019, and there's silence. There's just silence, and this is I spoke to Shem Yudua, why don't the shluchim say something about it? And he said to me, because he said to me when he met me, and he knows, understands the case. He says the world is going crazy. I said, so why don't the shluchim do something? But he says, well, the problem is in every Chabad house there's some people that are for this and some people are against it, and the shliach can't speak. I mean, if we cannot speak up against murder and suicide, I can't imagine that is what our Rebbe and our Rebbeim and our Shpashtus of the Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation and all the way back to the beginning of time, Adam Rishon, that this is something that they would countenance silence on the basis that, oh, there's nothing we could do about it, and it might lose some members in the shul. We have to educate everyone in the Chabad house why this is murder, suicide. That's why we understand why you would think it's permissible and why it's actually a good thing, but let's tell you why it's not a good thing. We have to change society to understand that this is murder, suicide, and everyone is a victim here. Every single human being is a victim. So there's a lot to be done in the case. We had a hearing yesterday with the new judge, because the previous judge retired. I don't know if the video of it is available. It was at the time live stream. I don't know if it's available now. The recording, we could try to find out. But
please, if you can find the recording, we'd love to see it. Yeah.
Yes, I just it's really vital that you have Talmidei Chachamim over here with people who are learning Torah. The Rebbe wanted everyone to learn smicha because they should become a meira hera and be Yisrael. And Meir Harabi Israel is not just answering people's questions about whether or not this is mutar asur in a household matters. Meir Harabi Israel means that you show the light for the direction of how the Jewish people should conduct themselves. And Meir Harabi Israel, the call of the hour is that we as the Yidden need to teach the nations what it means to be a human being. And the receptiveness, there's such a kiddush Hashem. When people of all walks of life see someone standing up and doing this, and some doctors objected to what we're doing, they're saying, well, the non-Jews are going to say, why are we causing trouble? What do you mean we're causing trouble? Not causing trouble. We are standing up for human life. We're speaking respectfully. We express ourselves clearly. We say why this is not in anyone's interest. And it does actually change people's understanding of this to realize this is part of a long-term battle from the beginning of time. Is human life the primary value, or are we going to succumb to the death movements? And the death movements were in Sparta and in Athens and in Rome and in Babylon and in the Nazis and in the communists. And that's what this is all about. Is human life the primary thing? Yes, and that's what the message we have to spend, and that's why my client is putting his life on the line, and his income on the line, and his reputation on the line, fighting this case, because and we also represent a patient and a Hindu doctor, a Hindu pharmacist, who's also in this case. But the point is, thank you so much, Rabbi Lerman, for giving me the opportunity to explain this. I hope you all take this to heart and realize that we've got to speak up. We've got to take action because things are fast changing around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Grace, David. I unmuted everyone, so if anyone has any questions, they can ask David. Right? Anyone have a question? And I'm not too shy to ask.
Hi, it's Avi K.
Hi, Avi.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, the other people, they have a svara that there's svaras that there should be pro-choice, that a person should have the ability to make the right decision. So what do you say to that person, that they should have the ability to make the right decision, even if there's even if there's something bad out there, they should be able to make the right decision, and they should be educated that they should make the right decision?
That's a great question, and the whole concept of pro-choice is something that started with abortions, and the concept is that a woman should have the right to choose about her body. Now, first of all, I don't know how old you are, but generally, if you've learned the Masechtas Kedushim and other things, that a woman in 99.9% of the cases had a choice whether to engage in activities with a man, that she had that choice at that point in time. And she chose to engage in activities that are meant to promote pregnancy. So that is something that the choice was already there. So the whole illusion now, she has the right to make a choice now that there's a growing human being in her.
A second, I think we froze.
Remember, rare of a rape pregnancy. We can discuss separately whether she should be able to have an abortion then, but that's not what most abortions are. The 60% of Black people in the
I'm saying we're getting a little cut off over here. David, hold on a second. For some reason it froze. Can everyone hear me? Can anyone hear me? Is it my connection or is it everyone else's? Hello, testing, testing.